Yes, we're back for another episode of the Play On Podcast, your weekly fix of all things Scottish football. I'm David Simmons, as always every week, joined by Anthony Brown and Stephen Commons. Make sure you stay tuned for the next hour as we look back on the weekend Scottish football in action, the highlights and the key talking points. On tonight's show, we're discussing the Celtic versus Rangers reaction, Knee No More, stand up against racism, and what a battle we've got on at the bottom of the table. It's all coming up on this week's edition of the Play On Podcast. But we want to hear from you guys like every week. We are fully live and interactive. Do get involved in the show. Drop us your message, your views on any of the points that we're discussing on tonight's show. Don't forget, if you're watching via YouTube, subscribe to the State of Mind YouTube channel and also get on over to Twitter and give the Play On Podcast a little follow over on Twitter. Another busy week, guys. Lots happening. We'll start off at the Old Firm game at Celtic Park yesterday. There was no Guard of Honour this weekend in the Old Firm clash, but it was also a no knee. It was the players standing up against racism. It's a very touchy subject. We've discussed maybe talking about this before and we've kind of steered away from it, but it is the key talking point in Scottish football at the moment. We need to discuss it. They've taken a huge step backwards, if you like. I don't know if it's because... Stephen, I'm going to just start with you, mate. What's your take on it? Why are the players having to resort to this in 2021?
I think the players, as much as I think everybody was on board with the sentiment behind taking the knee before games, kind of at the start of the process. Obviously everything that happened during the first lockdown and with George Floyd and America kind of brought these issues again in world terms right up to the front of the popular culture. And football, I think, probably saw the platform that they have as a way of kind of communicating that message to say that discrimination of any kind is not appropriate within football or out with. What I think the position they find themselves in just now is obviously yet again another incident, this time on a football pitch, has brought the problem of racism again careering to the front of everybody's consciousness. And I think the players now, obviously, I think Wilfred Zaha did it a couple of weeks before this to say, listen, this taking a knee is not having the same impact as it did at the start, quite understandably. So he chose to no longer do it, as much as he obviously stands with the message. He thought that by refusing to take a knee and not doing it, it would maybe raise a bit more of an issue towards it. And I think now, given what happened on Thursday night to Glenn Kamara, I think the Scottish football family, a lot of them have chosen to do the same thing. I think we saw, and I think the first thing we need to touch on from yesterday's game is actually nothing to do with the football, but actually the small gesture that Scott Brown did before the game, in crossing the halfway line and going and making a beeline for Glenn Kamara, shaking his hand and just sort of saying to him, listen, we're all, like, no matter what happens today, this is a completely different issue. We all stand beside you. And I thought that was a magnificent thing for Scott Brown to do on behalf of Celtic. I'm sure he obviously was representing the entire football club. And I thought that was great. Both sets of players obviously chose not to take a knee. They stood, the Rangers staff and substitutes stood on the touchline and made a point of kind of saying, we're no longer going to take a knee. We're going to stand with our player and we're going to back him. We believe what's happened, and I think it's pretty obvious for anybody who's watched the footage or kind of followed the story. I think it's a sad day for football, but unfortunately these things do happen, and it's sad that football's a reflection of society. And in 2021, as you say, we should be in a position where the colour of somebody's skin should not be something that we should even be bringing up in terms of a positive or a negative connotation. It just baffles me. But I think it's a good thing that the teams have kind of again brought this to the front of the consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to reiterate what you said, obviously this is after Stevie Gerrard come out and praised the Scottish-wide support this week after Glenn Kamara allegedly experienced abuse midweek. A nice touch by Scott Brown, like you said, prior to yesterday's game. It sent a clear message of unity. Anthony, Livingston captain Marvin Bartley, he says that discussions have been held about players possibly having to walk off the pitch if they receive any racial abuse. A similar question to Stephen. Why is it kind of come to this? Are players going to have to resort to walking off the pitch?
Yeah, but it's just an ongoing thing. I mean, you think it's not a major issue, and then incidents just seem to flare up all the time now. I mean, the one on Thursday night was particularly distressing because it was so blatant to everybody that something untoward had been said, and you could see. I mean, I think everybody just wanted to reach out and give Kamara a hug at that moment when you saw how distressed he was in the aftermath of it. Just really horrible to watch, to see somebody so blatantly. I mean, I know we're saying alleged, but let's be honest. He said it. You can tell by the reaction that happened.
Yeah.
And it was just horrible to watch, really horrible. And I mean, going back to the stuff about taking the knee and standing up, to be honest, I have no preference for either or. It's just the fact that people are making that gesture at the start of a game, for me, is a step in the right direction. People might say it's an empty gesture, it's a token gesture, but the fact is, we are talking about it now. We're talking about it a lot more than we were previously. Certainly since all the Black Lives Matter stuff. I know that divides opinion about whether it's a valid sort of movement or whatever. But I've certainly started to think more deeply about racism since last summer than probably I had before. I've always been against it, but I've probably started to see it more from a black person's perspective, more so than I had before, just because it's so much in the public domain in terms of people talking about it. So for me, any gesture at the start of a game, however little it may seem, taking a knee or standing up, whatever, to me is good in terms of just keeping racism and the fight against it in the public eye, because it's something we can't get complacent about, because it's still there, it's still rearing its head pretty much every other week, or far more regularly than that in terms of all the social media stuff that's popping up. And it's despicable, it's unforgivable, unacceptable, and there is clearly a long, long way to go in terms of completely eradicating it. I'd like to think the vast majority of certainly the Scottish football population stroke public are very much aware of what's acceptable and what's not in terms of racism, but there clearly is still a few people that just aren't grasping it or just continue to do things to upset people. I mean, this one on Thursday night, I mean, just everything that followed from it. It wasn't just the incident itself, it was the Slavia Prague statement was just so lacking in class, lacking in contrition. I know they sort of have to defend their player to an extent, but it just completely lacked any sort of empathy with what Kamara was going through at that point. And then it creates a situation where you get the Slavia Prague fans back in the Czech Republic holding up that banner and putting it on social media. And it's just been a really horrible episode. And I dare say it probably will. You'll get these little incidents flaring up here and there. And until it's completely eradicated, which could be years, could be centuries away. I mean, hopefully it's not. But I mean, I think we've definitely moved forward over time, but there's still clearly a lot of work to be done. And you mentioned Marvin Bartley there. I think he's a great guy to have on board for this, because he speaks very well on the subject. He speaks passionately, has a good understanding of what the problem is. And he's very good at sort of just being an ambassador, I guess, for tackling this. And I think that's a good move, getting him on board in terms of having a figurehead who really cares about it and understands the issues.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, another person that's come out and spoke about is the National Assistant Manager, Stephen Reid. He said that players have the right to walk off the pitch if they are subject to racial abuse as Scotland start their World Cup qualifier campaign at home to Austria this Thursday, which we'll touch on a bit later on the show. We've talked about the national team, we've talked about the Celtic and Rangers squad, how they're handling it. Stephen, you're involved in an amateur football team. I mean, even down at the lower levels, it's still a key thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we discussed very briefly before we came on air that I had a similar issue as a manager of a Sunday amateur team, where one of our black players was racially abused on our touchline. Like, we heard every word of it, and I just told the players to leave the pitch. We walked off. It became an issue for us as a club, because we then had to go in front of the league and explain what had happened. We very similarly to what happened with Slavia Prague, the opposition manager or staff from the opposition team had obviously asked their player, "What did you say?" He said, "I didn't say anything," and they backed their man. So they basically said, "Oh, listen, you have walked off the park. Like, we were actually losing the game at the time, same as Rangers." The Slavia manager obviously came out and said that Rangers were just bad losers, and they were kind of kicking this up as a way of kind of putting It's well beyond that. We made that point when we went in front of the league. We said, listen, in no way, shape, or form are we trying to claim the tie. The game is irrelevant. And I think Rangers' statement and what Stephen Gerrard said after the game kind of echoed that. And he basically said, listen, we were beaten by a better team. We wished the club itself good luck in the next round. We were comfortably beaten. We were well beaten. We don't have any complaint about that. But we will be backing our player to the hilt, and we will be pushing this as far as we can. And I think that that little incident that we had in terms of amateur football, if that's up here in Edinburgh, which I mean, there is not a massive black population in Edinburgh compared to other parts of the UK. I mean, if we are having to deal with that even just once from our team, I mean, imagine what. I mean, this must go on thousands of times across the UK at all different levels of football, and it's just unacceptable.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. Absolutely, mate. The sooner it's kicked out, the better. So let's touch on yesterday's game, Celtic versus Rangers. It finished 1-1, as we know. Not a great deal to write home about watching it, Anthony. It wasn't a classic. It wasn't a really high-scoring affair. Not a lot of meaty tackles, if you like. What was your take on yesterday's game?
I think a draw was probably fair. I think we should probably start by, I guess, praising the majority of supporters for staying away from the stadium. I know there was a little bit of a gathering in Armadale, which is obviously against what people were hoping would happen. That's a bit regrettable. And obviously there was, I know down in Bonnyrigg, there was people painting curbs and stuff, which to me is pretty disgusting. I know people see it as harmless fun, but I drove past the pub in Bonnyrigg yesterday and it was all painted blue, white and red, and people are having to go out and paint the pavement and fix it all and on their day off or whatever, and it's not on. It's pathetic, really pathetic stuff. But beyond that, generally, it seems like the majority of the Rangers and Celtic supporters behaved themselves, so fair play in light of all the hype and the build-up to it. The game itself was a bit of a damp squib, I think, probably reflective of the fact that the title race is gone and there's no fans in the stadium. I think probably Rangers are happier with the point in terms of maintaining their unbeaten run, going away from home, coming a goal behind. And also with Celtic having that debatable penalty. So Celtic will probably feel a bit more aggrieved than Rangers at not winning the game. From Celtic's perspective, it was just sort of, I guess, a typical instance of them lacking the fire in the belly required to go out and get an element of, not revenge, because nothing's going to avenge the league title win, but just lay down a marker, I guess, for later in the season. They just didn't seem to have that spark about them to go and do that. And I guess some of that comes back to not having supporters in the stadium. It's never going to be a proper Old Firm game in that sort of environment. So I've sympathy for both sets of players in that regard. But yeah, as you said, not much to write home about, I suppose, beyond the penalty debate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the shots that Celtic did get on target, obviously, there was a few crucial saves again made by Alan McGregor. Stephen, at the age of, almost 40-year-old he's kicking on. Is he still going to pick up that Player of the Year award, possibly, for Rangers?
I mean, yeah, he's got to be in the running, I would imagine. Again, though, I think if you look at Celtic's last two matches, they've had something ridiculous, like over 40 shots at goal over two games. And if you look at the saves that Alan McGregor made, I mean, none of them are world class, great. Like, I mean, he's made some good saves and he's reacted well to some of them. The one that kind of went through his legs, he reacted really quickly and kind of dived behind him and grabbed it. But I just think that Celtic were very wasteful. I think that if you look at how John Kennedy had set them up, there's numerous factors you could go into in this game. John Kennedy's, you were looking at that team selection and thinking, how is a John Kennedy team going to set up in an Old Firm game compared to Neil Lennon's or Ronnie Dyler's or anyone before that? And I just didn't see, it was the same faces and the same-ish system with the same substitutes made at pretty much the same times as Neil Lennon was making them. It was just so uninspiring. And if you're John Kennedy and you're looking to try and put your name forward as a potential manager of Celtic going forward, why did you not try something different? I mean, Celtic, as you say, dominated a lot of the possession, dominated most of the chances. I think they played well in spells of the game, but they were up against a team who had been battered from pillar to post for 90 minutes on Thursday night. They had to go through the turmoil of this racism the incidents that had happened on Thursday. And Celtic had 2 weeks to prepare for that match. Like they looked just a team devoid of ideas. They didn't look sharp. Again, in patterns of play, there were some. They played down the left, and they were pretty successful in spells. But it looked like a failed job interview for me for John Kennedy. I just don't think he did anything to inspire that team to do anything different than they have been doing for the last 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, I mean, for Steven Gerrard, his side's only conceded 10 goals all season. The unbeaten season is still on the cards for Rangers. Anthony, do you think they'll achieve that? Is that now Stevie Gerrard's aim now that the title's tucked up?
Yeah, it's certainly looking a lot more likely now. I mean, we spoke about it long before Christmas and I dismissed the possibility of them going unbeaten. And now that, I mean, yesterday was the sort of game where they could easily have come unstuck because they've won the title. As you say, they had the European game on the Thursday. They're away from home against a Celtic team that you would expect would have some sort of point to prove, and they've come away from that unscathed. So the next Old Firm game will be Ibrox, so they'll fancy themselves there. And obviously they'll be perfectly entitled to fancy themselves in all 4 other games. I mean, the only thing really that's going to trip them up is complacency, you would think, in the closing 5 games, because they don't really have anything to play for beyond this unbeaten run. I guess the fact they've still got a Scottish Cup campaign to play should help them maintain some element of focus between now and the end of the season. If they didn't have that, there may be an element of them switching off and just down in tools for the summer. But they should have this drive to keep their sharpness for the Cup, because that would be good for them if they could win the double, and also that just to go invincible through the league campaign. I know Celtic fans will say it's not a proper invincible season because they've not done it across all 3 tournaments the way Celtic did a few years ago. But I think if Rangers can go the whole season without losing a game, that's a phenomenal achievement, no matter what you say about the standard of the league or whatever this year. And we can debate that either way till the cows come home. But I mean, if they can see out these last 5 games without losing, it's a fantastic achievement and certainly one worth shouting about.
Yeah, I mean, the fixtures have been released. They were released today. Rangers finish at home to Aberdeen, and the final derby with Celtic is on the 2nd of May. Like you said, it doesn't quite possibly live up to the season campaign in 2016-17 that Celtic went undefeated. Brendan Rodgers' side, they got a 106-point haul that season, and that because of the draw yesterday, that can't actually be smashed. But Stephen, that's not going to keep Stevie G up at night, is it?
Nah, they won't care about that at all. I mean, the fact that might be something bragging rights for the fans or whatever, but to me, I don't think you can compare those 2 teams. Like, I think Brendan Rodgers' team, the Celtic team, they were all encompassing. Like, and I know that might be down to the fact that there's been no fans on the ground, and it just seems to have been a bit more of a low key season this year. But I just think that Brendan Rodgers Celtic team was unbelievable. They were so special, and don't get me wrong, Rangers have been fantastic this year, and I think you need to give them massive credit for what they've done. But again, Steven Gerrard, Rangers players, Rangers board will not give one single, you know what, about what anybody's saying about them being compared to that team. The one thing that might trip them up is that if you actually look, the last 2 Glasgow derbies or Old Firm games, whatever you want to call them, Celtic have been the better team in both of them. Like, so there's nothing to say that Celtic couldn't go and win at Ibrox. Like, I mean, it's not an impossibility. But I just think that you had to have seen something more from Celtic yesterday. You had to see just a bit more drive, a bit more fight, a bit more passion about them. But it just seemed to be that they got that reasonably early goal, and then they had a couple of chances before that. Pretty controversially, if you listen to Celtic fans, I don't think that was anywhere near a penalty that Odsonne Edouard was denied. Everybody in the Celtic camp, fans, manager, players, seem to be absolutely furious about the fact that Willie Collins denied them a stonewall penalty. I don't see what they're saying at all.
I don't think it's a penalty.
I do not see it. They had who's the referee down in the former referee in England that does all the stuff on Sky? Is it Dermot Gallagher? Dermot Gallagher. They had him review it today, and he said, "No, the referee got it spot on." every pundit I've seen has said the same thing. So I don't know if it's Celtic fans and players kind of clutching at straws. I don't think they need to do that, to be honest. I think on the balance of play and the way that things have gone, they have been the better team. But the facts are they've had 1 point out of 2 games against their biggest rivals. But that's just the way it goes sometimes. But if I was Celtic, I wouldn't be. It's not a foregone conclusion that Rangers are going to win all the rest of these games. And I would still be, if I'm John Kennedy, I know it seems trivial and pointless, but I'd still be going all out to sort of say, let's leave at least a bit of a marker for next season. Like if we just don't turn up again in one of these games and they steamroller us, it's just for next season. It's a point to Rangers already.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for all the comments that are coming. I'm trying to get through them. Hi to David Kelly. I think that Rangers' performances haven't been great since about December, but they get the job done. Well-drilled team who will only lose if they don't turn up for a game. I kind of agree with that comment. You mentioned, Stephen, that John Kennedy maybe never had a great job interview, by the way, he lined up his team on Saturday. Before the game, the pundits were James McFadden, Chris Boyd and Martin O'Neill. Martin O'Neill, he was quite quick to rule himself out of the race. He wasn't one of the favourites, but he was maybe in the top 10 to possibly take on the Celtic job. He was quite forefront in pushing his good friend Roy Keane in the manager's seat, though. Do you think that he might be interested in it? I mean, I think we've touched on this before.
Sure, he'd be interested, but not for me. Just my personal opinion, I don't think Roy Keane's. I wouldn't want him being my manager. I just think he's a bit of a shock jock. Certainly as a pundit, he says things for effect that don't actually mean that much. They're sort of sound bites that sound good and people lap them up because they look good on paper and what have you. But to be honest, I would find it hard to work under a guy like him. I just think he's too, I don't know, on a different wavelength to the vast majority of people in terms of the way he talks about things. I mean, he seems like a decent enough guy, but I don't know. I don't think he's done enough as a manager. Yes, he's got a brilliant playing career behind him, but I think there's far better alternatives out there. Alex Neil, for instance, is probably one
that's my next question, Anthony.
The scramble for Roy Keane, or the kind of upturn in people talking about Roy Keane, is, in my opinion, purely because of how gutless Celtic have been. And the kind of the way that they've given up this title, which is obviously the most important title to the fans, to the board, to everyone, and they've just kind of given it up at a whimper. Like, I was looking at it the other day of when Rangers did their 9 in a row and Celtic stopped it. What was the kind of situation? And it was like there was like 2 points in it. It was like minimal points. Like, it went down to the last day. This is going to be like a record, like, points difference between teams. I think that is probably fed into why people are sort of saying, well, maybe they need somebody like a Roy Keane that's going to go in and crack skulls. But they had Neil Lennon for that.
You'd argue Neil Lennon's that sort of character as well.
Exactly. They had Neil Lennon. They had the person who was going to go in and crack skulls. And what they need now is somebody with a plan, somebody with clear communication skills. I know we keep going back to Brendan Rodgers and saying you're probably unlikely to find somebody at that level again. But what you need to try and do is make it up in the aggregate, like make it up with the director of football that's coming in. I mean, obviously, it seems to be that it's Fergal Harkin that is going to be. I mean, I haven't seen anybody else's name mentioned with any great gusto, so I think it's going to be him. He comes with a great pedigree. He was the loans manager at Man City, so he's well connected. He knows his way around the English market, the European market. So you've got somebody there who's got good connections and potentially a person that can recruit well for the club. You then need to make it up with someone who's not just a good coach. A good coach can be found in many places. John Kennedy's probably a good coach, but you need somebody who's going to go in and, as we've said before, Steven Gerrard walks into a room and people stop talking because they have just immediate respect for the guy. Everything that Steven Gerrard says, there's substance behind it. You can just hearing him being interviewed, like that 7 or 8 minute interview that he did after the game on Thursday night. It's a situation where he's never had to be put there before as a manager or probably as a player. He's put in front of the media and he was not flustered. He was measured in what he was saying. And that's the sort of person you need. You need somebody who, within 5 minutes of speaking to them, you think this guy's decent. This guy is something. And I don't have the answer for Celtic, but that is probably why they're taking as long as they are, because they need to try to bring in not a Roy Keane, not a Neil Lennon. They need something a bit cleverer than that. But again, I'm not sure I buy into the idea of Enzo Maresca, an under-23s manager with no experience. I mean, how is someone like that getting a job like Celtic? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. There seems to be that sort of... you've got Arteta getting the Arsenal job. I mean, this would never have happened 20 years ago, that a player who had just finished playing would walk into a job like that. Enzo Maresca has never managed a first-team game in his life, and he's going to potentially walk in and be the Celtic manager. So you can see why there is a kind of clamour for somebody with a bit more experience and gravitas. But it's again, I don't have the answer. Like, it's sitting here now. If someone says, who's the next Celtic manager? I would have to give you a list of 5 players, if 5 people. I do not know who they're going to go for.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony, you obviously touched on that Preston have parted company with manager Alex Neil. Isn't it, like you say, his name's going to be flung about with every vacant job now? I mean, what sort of club could you see him moving to? Is Celtic a bit out of his reach? Could you see him maybe more going up to Pittodrie, maybe?
Oh, yeah,
give him the Hearts job. Give him the Hearts job.
I think Alex Neil to Celtic, I think a lot of Celtic fans would probably be quite underwhelmed with that. I'm not saying he shouldn't get the job. I mean, certainly he's one worth looking at. I'm not saying he definitely should get the job, but I think he's one worth considering because he's managed in Scotland. He did pretty well. Obviously, Hamilton Accies a totally different ballgame to managing Celtic. But he's obviously gone down to England and done reasonably well there in his time. Obviously, it's fizzled out more recently at Preston, but I think everybody, no matter who they are, is going to have a period in their career where things have not gone their way. Brendan Rodgers had that before he came to Celtic. But obviously he was operating at a slightly higher level than what Alex Neil was. Neil's pedigree is going to be pretty good. Whether it's enough to appeal to Celtic fans, I don't know. But certainly if Aberdeen, I think Aberdeen should certainly be asking the question. I think it'd be negligent not to. I think he's a guy that he may be just out of Aberdeen's reach, but I think he's definitely a more appealing option to me than the Stephen Glass / Scott Brown partnership would be. And I think he's probably will also feel that he's still got a chance of getting a decent job in England as well going forward. But I mean, he's got options. He's not going to be out of work for long, I wouldn't think, and he probably is able to call the shots to some extent about what level he goes in at next.
Yeah. The thing is, if the Celtic fans were upset about Eddie Howe's credentials, they're not going to be very happy with Alex Neil's just because he's Scottish. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, Eddie Howe's done a lot more than Alex Neil has. So I get you're never going to appease everybody, but I do think it's a good shout. Alex Neil is the kind of guy that you want to at least speak to and sort of see if what he's got to say about it. But yeah, maybe is more realistic for Aberdeen.
Yeah, if we look at some other fixtures from the weekend, there was agony for St Mirren and ecstasy for St Johnstone and a top 6 battle. Callum Davidson clinched a place in the top 6 after a 1-0 win against Ross County. St Johnstone, Anthony, on the budget that they must have, I mean, they've went over and above this season, haven't they?
Not just this season, this past decade, they've gone over and above expectations. I mean, they've finished in the top 8 out of the last 10 seasons. They've won 2 cups. On those stats alone, they've outperformed everybody out with Celtic. I know Aberdeen have obviously been higher in the league than them over time, but St Johnstone have won one more cup. Just a fantastic achievement for a club of St Johnstone's stature, and they're now in a position whereby I did a tweet the other night about how many top 6 finishes all the teams had over the past 10 years. And a St Johnstone fan replied, and he was absolutely right. He says, it's time now for everybody who says we shouldn't be losing. I think it was something like, it's everybody who says we shouldn't be losing to teams like St Johnstone. I've lost my train of thought there, but what I was going to say, but he was basically saying no team can now say we shouldn't be losing to a team like St Johnstone because St Johnstone are now a proven top-end team. Regardless of budget, they've found a way to keep themselves in the upper echelons of Scottish football. In the league and in the cup competitions, they've completely outperformed Hearts, Hibs and Dundee United over that period. Yes, you could argue that Hearts, Hibs and Dundee United have underperformed in terms of the money they've spent in relation to St Johnstone, but if money was the be-all and end-all when it came to football, then there would be no point in playing because the teams with the money would always just finish in monetary order. St Johnstone have shown that there are ways to do it without throwing money at it, and they've done. I think the astonishing thing is they've done it with several different managers over that period of time. There's Steve Lomas. I mean, it started with Derek McInnes, I guess, Steve Lomas, Tommy Wright, and now Callum Davidson's continuing it. So it's been a remarkable period for them, and I think the funny thing with St Johnstone is they have these seasons where they start really slow, and you think, their bubbles burst, that's them drifting into a relegation battle, and then suddenly when it comes around to the split, they always seem to be there and thereabouts. Even last season, I suppose they were fortunate to get the top six because it was done when they sort of overtook Hibs on average points after the season got ended prematurely, but they're just always there in that position to capitalise on these sort of situations. And it's when you compare it against a team like St Mirren, who have never been in the top six. I mean, those two clubs are probably identical in terms of size, and fan base and budget and things like that, stadium size, all the things you would sort of judge clubs on. St Mirren and St Johnstone are very similar, and St Mirren haven't been able to touch the top six. Well, they looked like they were going to be in it on Saturday and then blew up in the last few minutes. So it's astonishing what St Johnstone have been able to do. And I think we now have to accept that they are a proper high-end Scottish Premiership club. They're not just a wee team punching above their weight anymore. They're a proper established high-end Scottish Premiership club.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony touched on it there, Stephen. Jim Goodwin's men came so close to that top six finish. Late equaliser by Hamilton Aki, seen them just miss out on that top six. Jim Goodwin, I mean, he's done a great job since he's went in there. We've praised him quite a lot, haven't we? I mean, how gutted will he be just to have missed out on that spot?
Very gutted. He'll be. I listened to an interview with him on Friday night, and he was saying in the interview that spell of games that we had when we had loads of players out with COVID, if we had won a couple more of them, we would be in fourth right now. And I just found it hilarious that at 4:45 on Saturday afternoon, they didn't even make the top six. So listen, it's one of these ones where when Tony Fitzpatrick at the start of the season said we're going to be a top six club this season, pretty much everybody in Scottish football laughed at them, and including myself. Like, I thought, what a dreamer! This guy's, there's absolutely no chance. But they've proven a lot of people wrong. But I think a lot of that is down to Jim Goodwin. I think Jim Goodwin's a fantastic manager. I'm really surprised that he hasn't been more heavily linked with the Aberdeen job. I thought it would be pretty much he would be one of the front running candidates, but he's barely been mentioned. But listen, it's a shame for them. I don't particularly have any good feelings towards St Mirren. They're not a club I particularly like very much. But listen, they'll just have to kind of their season's pretty much done now, apart from the cup, because they're not going to finish much lower than where they are now. So start building for next year.
That's it. I mean,
the Jim Goodwin thing. I take your point. He has obviously done a good job at St Mirren, but in terms of going to Aberdeen, I don't know how you could justify that to, like, in terms of I'm not making the top six. I'm not saying that game on Saturday should define whether he gets the Aberdeen job.
Stephen Glass is going to get the job.
I know.
That's how you justify it. But Stephen even Glass, what's he done? He's the under-20s manager for Atlanta United or something.
Yeah, I know. But equally, I don't know how you could say Goodwin would be a good candidate for the Aberdeen job on the basis that he's never. I could understand if he'd taken St Mirren into the top six, even the top four or whatever, the way Tommy Wright did. But you would argue Tommy Wright's got far better credentials for the Aberdeen job on that basis, in terms of he's actually operated
Absolutely.
in the top.
If Tommy Wright had still been available when Derek McInnes had been removed from his position, I would have been saying the same thing about him. But I don't think I think it's more realistic that they go for a kind of younger, up and coming manager with a bit of like he's improved every single club he's been at. Like, people rant and rave about Jack Ross. He's done as good a job as Jack Ross has done, if not better. So, like, he's at a different stage of his career, but I think he is a guy who has potential. And it depends what Aberdeen are wanting. Like, they can't. Surely Aberdeen must be going for a project manager next, because if they were going to just go for someone who's going to continue to keep them at the position that they're at, they're not going to get anybody close to McInnes. No one even near his ability.
Alex Neil.
His ability level. Alex Neil.
I'd say Alex Neil's probably the closest they could get in terms of calibre.
It would cost them a fortune to get Alex Neil.
I know.
He'll be on big money. So it's just, again, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens up there.
Anthony, you mentioned Tommy Wright. He enjoyed his first win as Killie boss at the weekend in Saturday's 4-1 win over Motherwell. Moved them off the bottom place in the league. It's going to be a really exciting end to the season down the bottom half there. You mentioned a tweet you put out about St Johnstone. I seen a tweet you put out about Kyle Lafferty and how maybe Hearts missed a trick not re-signing him. He scored after the first minute for Kilmarnock. He's really going to be a key player and hopefully keeping Killie up this season, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Tommy Wright, I mean, it's about time they got that win, because we've been sort of banging on about how he was in to save Kilmarnock, and it was starting to shape up as maybe a sort of Terry Butcher Hibs appointment at one stage, because they just couldn't buy a win. But now they've got off and running. I mean, that's a really good win they've got against Motherwell. I know they were helped by some dodgy goalkeeping, but that's a big win for them, and that'll breathe life into them, you would think, going into the post-split fixtures. And Lafferty is already, 3 or 4 games in, becoming something of a talisman for them. And it's not a surprise to me. I'm really astonished that Hearts haven't tried to sign him at any point. I say Hearts because he's been there recently and proven that he can score goals there. So he would have been an obvious place for them to go in terms of, I think it's very hard for Hearts to source players who are actually good enough to play for them and deal with the demands of playing for them. So when you get a guy like Lafferty, I know he wasn't absolutely brilliant, but he scored 19 goals in his one season there in a pretty mediocre Hearts team. And to me, he obviously got a step up in going to Rangers, and as soon as he became available, it's not like he's over the hill or anything. I was just astonished that Hearts didn't say, right, back you come, Kyle. And because he's got that bond with the supporters as well, which a bit like Rudy Scatchell had, whereby you can come back in and it all feels a bit natural and things just click. And I would have just expected him to, no matter how good or bad Hearts were at any point in time, I would expect Lafferty always to be a decent goal scorer in the Hearts team, just because he's one of these players that seems to be equipped for the demands of playing at Tynecastle. But in terms of what he's doing at Kilmarnock, I mean, he's been absolutely brilliant. I know he's only scored in his last 2 games, but even the game before that, I can't remember who it was against.
The goal disallowed, wasn't there, in that game, I think?
Yeah, and I saw a Kilmarnock fan tweeting today saying he's done more for them in a month than Brophy did in a year or something like that. So he's the sort of guy that can really be the difference between getting relegated and finishing 10th, finishing 9th.
Yeah,
I think the fact he didn't go to Hearts was probably down to personality more than anything else. I think Robbie Neilson took one look at him and thought, no, we do not need, because I saw Tommy Wright. I don't know if it was how much it was tongue in cheek or not, because I didn't actually physically see him say it, but the comments he was saying about him was that he was an absolute nightmare. Like, he's just non-stop, like they're trying to do shape and training, he's pulling down folks' shorts, and like I don't know how much of it he was saying, like, again, he's a nightmare but with a big smile on his face. It could have been that, but you cannot argue with the effect he's had on that team, whether it be through his personality or through his undoubted ability. But I just think that Robbie Neilson probably looked at it and thought, I've got enough issues here already. I do not need this guy coming in.
Stephen, my argument to that is you need players like that. You need that personality. 100%. You need that team spirit in a squad.
This is the thing. Like, you look at guys like Jason Cummins, right? Jason Cummins is at Dundee, and that's absolutely scandalous that he's at a club like Dundee, because you look at some of the strikers who are plying their trade in the Premier League, and they couldn't lace Jason Cummins' boots. He has got so much more natural ability than them, but he has this reputation as being a loose cannon. But as you say, sometimes you need guys like that in a dressing room. Like, sometimes you maybe need to give them a bit more. You need to let them off the reins a little bit more and sort of say, listen, we might. If you did that, you're not getting away with it. But with him, we're going to let him away with it because of what he offers us on and off the
20 goals a season.
Exactly. Well, he's the closest we've had to a 20-goal a season striker since Joe Robertson, I think, at Hearts. Like, that is absolutely scandalous that that's the case. But he was the most natural finisher, and as much as I don't for a second think that there was no issues with Kyle Lafferty when he was at Hearts, they all seem to be. There was never anything major. There was never any huge issues or huge problems that.
I think the biggest issue was his own gambling issues, which was his own problem almost. And yes, of course, that was something Hearts had to deal with. But I don't think he's the easiest character to manage. Totally, he obviously comes with a little bit of baggage, and I can imagine he's a little bit difficult to keep on side. But I mean, how hard can it be to? He's not a sinister character. He's not a dodgy character that's going to lead players into dangerous scenarios or whatever. I mean, how bad can it be? You just put an arm around the guy and just work out a way of managing him, whether you need to keep prodding him with a stick or whether you need to give him a cuddle here and there. I mean, it's just basic man management would be enough to keep guys like that on track. And the fact that I totally understand, ideally you want everybody in your team to be ultra professional, the perfect guy and all that, but sometimes you need a wee maverick who's, yes, he might be high maintenance at times and he maybe has a wee strop and storms off the training pitch now and again, but if he's banging in 2 decisive goals every other weekend, he's worth the hassle. I don't see any reason not to go with these guys, unless they're absolute bomb scares. But I mean, let's be honest, Lafferty's not that sort of character. Neither's Jason Cummings. They both have their issues. They're both quirky characters and probably are that little bit harder to manage than certain other characters. But they're not serial troublemakers or anything like that. I mean, but they're goal scorers, and that should outweigh any negatives.
Yeah, absolutely. If we travel through to West Lothian, it finished Livingston 1, Hibs 1 at the weekend. Livingston manager David Martindale says his side will chase a 4th place finish after their Scottish Premiership draw with Hibs at the weekend. Both goals came in the first half. Christian Doidge equaliser cancelled out Craig Sybil's opener. Hibs are now 7 points clear in 3rd, while Livingston stay 5th, are within 5 points of Aberdeen. My question to you, Stephen, is do you see Livy catching Aberdeen? Because Aberdeen are not on a good run at the moment.
Yeah, potentially. Kind of similar to the John Kennedy thing. There didn't seem to be any new manager bounce from Sheeran and Robson on Saturday for Aberdeen. Tannadice is a difficult place to go. I mean, sometimes this season it hasn't been. I mean, they got beat 5-1 by St Mirren, I think, at one point, but it's not a given that a team like Aberdeen are going to go to Dundee United and win a game. It wasn't. It was a tight match, and they lost it. But yet again, if you look at it kind of statistically over what's happened the last few weeks, every single time that Hibs have slipped up, which they have done 3 times, I think, out the last 4 or 5 games, Aberdeen have not taken advantage of it. I think they gained a point on Hibs throughout that entire period. So Hibs drew with Livingston, which for them will not be a good result, and yet they actually strengthened their position at third place in the league. So it's it depends what mentality Aberdeen have got. If their players are on the beach, so to speak, which I don't for a second believe that a guy like Barry Robson or Paul Sheeran would allow to happen, then it's possible that Aberdeen could lose every match between now and the end of the season. But I just don't see it happening. I think Aberdeen will at some point get a spark, will at some point get a kick up the backside and sort of say, right, now we have to start playing. But it could make it interesting. I think Hibs have pretty much tied up 3rd place. So it's kind of 4th, 5th and 6th who finishes where. The head-to-head game will be a decisive one, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like Stephen said, Anthony, Hibs are fortunate that Aberdeen's currently going through quite a bad spell, or that might be different for that 3rd spot. Aberdeen intern manager Paul Sheeran said that they lack goals. It's becoming more of a worry after they have failed to score for the 9th time in 10 games. I mean, they're going through a bit of a transition. Is it going to be a case of let's just get through to the end of the season and we'll have a full revamp at Pittodrie?
Certainly looks that way. I mean, I think this is a season that most Aberdeen fans will be delighted to see the back of. But I guess the consolation for them should be that they all go into plan. They will still finish in 4th. I mean, Livingston are 4 or 5 points behind, and obviously still to play Aberdeen. If Livingston beat Aberdeen, it becomes a different ballgame. Then it's game on. And I heard David Martindale say that they still believe they can do it if they beat Aberdeen. So from Aberdeen's perspective, they'll just be hoping they can hang in there, cling on to 4th place, and just get this season put to bed, and then set about appointing a new manager. Who that'll be? Obviously, it's looking like Stephen Glass is the main candidate, although Dave Cormack was keen to stress that they've not earmarked anybody as yet. So, like at Celtic, an interesting few weeks and months ahead in terms of how it all pans out and how things are looking come the start of next season. I keep forgetting we've still got the Scottish Cup to wrap up as well. Well, to wrap up. We've still got all 5 rounds to play, haven't we? Starting
Starting tomorrow night, yeah. But thanks to this comment has come in. KRC1 Martin Dale has shown good ambition. Just glad my wee Towns Football Club got in the top 6. Again, we've touched on it before. I mean, Livingston are an extremely small club to be achieving top 6 of the top league, your domestic football league. You know, it's a great achievement. I mean, let's move on to the Championship. On Saturday, it finished Arbroath 0, Heart of Midlothian 0, Stephen. Hearts edged closer to that Championship title despite turning in another uninspiring display in the goalless draw at Arbroath. Robbie Nielsen's side, who are 16 points clear, need 3 wins to guarantee an immediate return to top flight. Another boring 0-0, mate, but it wasn't the Friday night curse this time. It wasn't on the TV. I mean,
no.
Are you happy just to keep putting points on the board, or...?
You can't even blame the Friday night curse anymore. It's just, but you could have predicted exactly what the post-match comments were going to be. It's windy, it's a difficult pitch, blah, de, blah, de, blah. Same stuff, a different week. I would have a lot more respect for Robbie Nielsen, and I know it might be counterproductive from the player's point of view. If he just came out and said, listen, today we were not good enough, I am not going to accept that from my players going forward. Anybody who wants to be here next season needs to vastly up their performances. And I'll tell you what, he would get so much more respect for the Hearts fans if he did say stuff like that. But the fact he comes out and he protects these players week on week, when anybody with 2 eyes can see that some of these performances are just nowhere near good enough. Like individual performances, team performances. And I'm sorry, but it comes for the management a lot of the time as well, because as much as he's restricted in the players he can select, I get that. He's probably restricted in the systems he can use because of the players who are available. I get that too. But the bare basics of football is run hard and try. Like, you're not telling me that a lot of these players are playing at full capacity and are trying as hard as they can in terms of running ability. See if you run and you can't run anymore after 60 minutes, fine. We'll hook you, we'll bring someone else on. That's why we've got this strong squad, supposedly, that we're supposed to have. I just think that it's getting beyond a joke now. And yes, we're 16 points clear, and folk are saying, what are we complaining about? But see the day that Heart of Midlothian start accepting drawing 0-0 with Arbroath, in a game as not even the fact that we missed loads and loads of chances, a game that probably Arbroath deserved to win, if I'm perfectly honest with you. Like, that is the day that I stop supporting Hearts. Like, that is not acceptable. We cannot accept that.
Yeah, I mean, carrying on from that, Anthony, I mean, Arbroath manager, one of my favourite people in Scottish football, Dick Campbell, said, we are playing the best team in the league and I don't think they even tested our goalkeeper. What does that say about Saturday's performance from Hearts?
Pretty much sums it up. I mean, it's as Stephen's pretty much covered it. It's been becoming a grim slog now this season. Again, like Aberdeen, like Celtic, it's one, even though Hearts will ultimately end up with their objective achieved, I think it's one that every Hearts supporter is just looking forward to putting to bed, getting into the Premier League and hoping things will be better next season, which I've said before, I think they will be. I mean, obviously, if they perform at the level they have done over the past few months, then they will get found out in the Premier League, in the Premiership rather. But I don't think it will be like that. I think being in the Premiership itself will inspire them to raise their game, play a different way, and just hopefully having supporters in the stadium will bring out the best in them. But yeah, it's been really grim. I mean, I think people now dread watching Hearts at the moment just because they know it's going to be a slog and it's going to be pretty uninspiring. I mean, it's all sort of a far cry from the start of the season as well, because it all started so well with that exciting game against Dundee. And then you had the cup run up to Christmas where they obviously beat Hibs and nearly beat Celtic. And then since Christmas, it's just been pretty poor overall. I mean, apart from the Wraith Rovers away game, they've been really, really underwhelming. And that's putting it mildly. So yeah, I mean, it's grim times in terms of supporters not being in the stadium and the way Hearts are playing, but ultimately they're still well clear at the top of the league, and that's the consolation, I guess, in this scenario, that they are so far ahead. And I mean, it could be that being that far ahead is having an impact on their intensity or lack of intensity in matches. Not that that should be an excuse, but subconsciously it will be.
That's the management. That's the management team's job to ensure that doesn't happen. You don't see, like, it'll be interesting to see what Rangers do for the next 4, 5, 6 weeks, because I can guarantee you right now, if they put in a performance anywhere near the level that Hearts did on Saturday, they would be absolutely ripped to shreds by Steven Gerrard, both publicly and in private. he can't accept that level for the foreseeable future. As much as I totally agree with you, Anthony, that going forward, I think we will be much more suited next year to playing in the Premier League. And I do have faith that we can get it right. But I just think that he's not doing himself any favours at this moment in time. Like, they need to be showing something between now and the end of the season to spark it for next season, because at this moment in time, the fans, and I don't know how much or how little that actually means to guys like Robbie Neilson, the fans are not having the majority of that squad. So if he wants less of a hatchet job to do in the summer, he needs to start getting more out of them.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Tangent here. I don't know if you're about to bring up the Brora game, but I've got a wee theory here that might be totally wide.
Oh, I like theories, Anthony. I like theories.
When Hearts won the cup in 1998, they obviously beat Rangers in the final, and obviously in the two previous finals they played against Rangers, they got beat in the 1996 Scottish Cup final, and then they lost in the 1996 League Cup final. Obviously, going into this tournament, they've lost to Celtic in both of the previous Scottish Cup finals. I wonder if we're going to get a similar situation here, where they learn from not their mistakes, but they've obviously gone pretty close in both of the two previous finals against Celtic.
Brora won, Hearts nil tomorrow night. That's your theory blown out the water.
That's my theory blown before it's even off the ground. But yes, if Hearts beat Celtic in the final here, it'll be me that called it. And if they go out to Brora tomorrow night,
somebody write that down. Somebody put that in a post-it note somewhere and write it down. Date and time.
I'm telling you, if that happens, I will personally buy you a bottle of champagne, Tony, and bring it round to the house.
Aye, from Lidl or Aldi or something like that. None of your money. If we look at other games in the Championship, it was United 1, Wraith Rovers 1, Dunfermline 0, Inverness Cali 1. It finished Morton 2, Queen of the South 1 as well. And at this weekend, we welcome back League 1 and 2. I mean, is this us hopefully starting to see a little bit light at the end of the tunnel, welcoming back League 1 and 2? Is it fans that are going to be allowed in next, Stephen, do you think?
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. I mean, I don't know if they would be silly enough to do anything maybe this season. They might kind of just say, listen, this is a write-off, but we are aiming for the start of next year. But I think it would be a huge boost to everyone, especially given the fact that we've got the Euros in the summer as well, that if even for the last game, even if they just did a token gesture, the last game we're going to have a 50% capacity and we're going to try and get people into the ground, even if it's just home fans only for all these stadiums, just to have something. Like I'll tell you now, even if I didn't get in to go and watch Hearts, it wouldn't bother me. Seeing some people going to watch Alloa, Arbroath, whoever, Partick Thistle, it would just lift the nation. It would lift everybody to just see some bodies back in football stadiums and a little bit of an atmosphere. I mean, if it was a 10% capacity, St John's would probably going to have to go and get some more fans in, because I don't think they usually hit that figure anyway.
I know. You bigged them up about half an hour ago, and now you just brought them right back down, mate.
Exactly. You can't put them up on a perch too much. You've got to knock them down sometimes.
Absolutely savage.
If they could do that towards the end of this season, fantastic. But I mean, realistically, I think we're looking more next year. And if that is the case, then great. But start aiming for that now and start building and prepping and whatever we need to do for safety and stuff. Get the teams drilled. Get every team. Let them know what they need to do to adhere to these safety procedures, and let them start doing these things now, to have everything in place for the start of next season. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we're in a much better position as a nation, and we can get back into these games and start watching football again.
Definitely, because that's what it's all about. I mean, supporters make the game. I mean, to be a bit more serious on, I mean, I know you joked about St Johnstone and stuff, but if there is next season only 20% fans allowed in, will that open up, Anthony, hopefully gates at maybe the smaller clubs, like your non-league teams, your amateur teams, your Division 2 teams, like your Edinburgh Cities, like your Spartans in the Edinburgh area where we're in, like to go and visit your local West of Scotland team, that your Cross Arthurleys, your St Rochs, do you know what I mean? Is that our fans, because they might not be guaranteed their seat at Celtic Park, at Ibrox, at Tynecastle, wherever it may be, to go and give your money to the smaller clubs in the game?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we're in a position whereby at the new season it's just full houses. I mean, I'm naive saying that. There may be a lot of obstacles to overcome before we can get to that stage, but I've got in my head that relatively early next season we're going to have full houses. I mean, obviously that's totally dependent on how everything evolves, but if we do get a situation where you can only get X amount of supporters in Premiership grounds in the early part, yeah, I think there will be I think people are just desperate to get into football stadiums, regardless of whether it's their own team, or people just want to go to a game and feel the sort of the buzz of other people walking to a game, and just all the stuff that goes with the match day. Because to be honest, I think most people, apart from probably people who are used to watching matches on TV every week and don't go to football, I think most people who go even on a semi-regular basis to football are fed up with watching it on a laptop screen or a TV screen with no supporters in the stadium, and the sort of empty feeling of it and the soulless feeling. I mean, I saw somebody today, I can't remember who it was, say they've watched every game this season, and this guy who plays for them, I think it might have been a Stenhousemuir fan, and he says he wouldn't recognise this player if he walked into his house, even though he's watched him play on a TV screen every game this season, and he feels like he's got a connection with him. He wouldn't actually physically recognise them. So I mean, it's very hard to connect, and I think that's why we've touched on this before. So many supporters are so angry with their teams. I mean, don't get me wrong, most teams have underperformed to some extent, but I think the fact fans aren't actually at the games to forge any connection with players, that's not helping the situation. I mean, it's a big part of football, just having even if they're not great players, supporters like to have a connection with some players, even if, like with Hearts, for instance, there was the one with Dickamona. He wasn't a brilliant footballer, but he had a bit of passion and a bit of connection with the supporters, and you can't get that through a TV screen. You just can't generate that sort of, all these things that are so important to the whole fabric of football and everything that goes around about it. So I think people just want, even as Stephen says, even if you're seeing other people in stadiums, it's going to make watching football on your own TV screen that bit more enjoyable.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Watching that Old Firm game yesterday with no fans was
exactly
heartbreaking, because those are the games you it doesn't matter if you support Rangers or Celtic, you will look forward to those games just for the blood and guts, the fans, the screaming. That's what you want. What yesterday was like a training game.
Yeah,
rubbish.
Nah, I agree, mate. Hi to this person that's commented as well. Love the Arthur Lee mention on the committee. Arthur Lee. I mean, that's it. I mean, that's what it comes down to. I mean, I'm a big fan of the junior ranks, the West of Scotland. I'm involved in the East of Scotland. Hi to David Kelly, who says, but those smaller clubs, we wouldn't be able to have fans in if they can't guarantee social distancing the way the big stadiums can. Trust me, if smaller clubs knew there was going to be bigger gates coming, they would make it work. Absolutely. Let's get back and just watch football at any level that we can. That's what the point I was trying to make. Let's have a look at some of the fixtures this week. It is the international break, so that means that Scotland are in action against Austria on Thursday night. Just quickly, guys, because we've got maybe 5 minutes left of the show. His team selection was a bit interesting. Anthony, there was no place for David Turnbull in Steve Clarke's squad. That was really quite surprising to me.
I think that's one of the ones that raised eyebrows, that, and probably Ryan Gould's omission in terms of the guys who didn't make the squad. I know Billy Gilmore was another one that people wanted in, but you can see both sides of that one. But I think Gould and Turnbull were the two that you're thinking they probably merited inclusion. But equally, the flip side of that is, who do you take out to let these guys in? I mean, people would say take out Christie, take out McGregor because they've been underperforming, but ultimately, the majority of these guys have played a part in getting Scotland to the tournament. So I can understand Steve Clarke staying loyal to the boys who did the job in November and got them past through the Serbia tie. So, I mean, it's always the issue with Scotland. You've got managers who like to keep a relatively settled squad and will tweak a few players here and there from squad to squad, and then you've got a clamour from supporters to promote whoever the in-form guy at that particular moment is and just get rid of anybody. But I mean, it's very hard to keep everybody happy, because if you go and drop Ryan Christie and McGregor or whoever, John Fleck, then people will say, why is John Fleck not in the squad? He's playing in the English Premier League. I think whoever a Scotland manager will always have people picking holes in his selection. But yeah, the Turnbull one and the Gold one, to a slightly lesser extent, they were surprising.
Do you think the Turnbull omission has anything to do with the fact that he keeps getting hooked early doors in games?
Possibly.
I don't know if that would maybe be an excuse for Steve Clarke, or he's looking at that saying, well, this kid's he's not really playing 90 minutes very often. So,
Stephen, I thought you were going to jump in there and with your Che Adams inclusion comment.
I'm a guru. It's what I do. Like, I put these things out there. If Steve Clarke chooses to listen to this podcast, then that's up to him.
In case you've never seen last week, Stephen said that Che Adams should get a place in the Scotland squad. Literally, we were off here, 10 minutes?
Yeah.
And it was
And
announced.
then the Daily Record ran a story of Scotland should look at Che Adams, and boom, he was called up 3 days later. Thank you very much. Good night, Vienna. But nah, I don't even know where that came from. I remembered that Alex McLeish had taken a run at him like a couple of seasons before, and I saw him score an absolute belter for Southampton maybe 2 weeks ago, and I was thinking he could potentially have played for Scotland, like. But yeah, so they've obviously, I think, reading between the lines, somebody from his camp got in touch with Steve Clarke to say he would actually be quite just exactly what I said, that he's probably looked at it and thought, I've got a chance of playing in the Euros here. I'm in. Count me in, guys.
Well, there you go, Stephen, an exclusive for you. In case you don't already know, we are probably going to be covering Thursday night's international match against Austria. We're going to be live on YouTube on the State of Minds page, going out half an hour before kick-off, having a look up to the run-up to the match, the 15 minutes in between at half-time. We'll be live on air, and we'll have the reaction as well at the end of the game. So our coverage will start on air at 7:15 before the Scotland game. Like I say, make sure you tune in to State of Mind on Thursday. We'll provide half-time analysis and full-time reaction, as already said. But that kind of sums up another episode of the Play On podcast, guys. The hour just absolutely flies away from us. On behalf of myself, Anthony Brown and Stephen Commons, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully we see you Thursday for the Scotland game, and hopefully the national side can get a victory. If not, then we'll possibly see you on Sunday for the Scotland game against Israel, and back on Monday night for another episode of the Play On podcast. Thanks for watching.